Hi, everybody, and welcome along to our latest instalment of the GAA Museum Book Club chat. This month we have been reading The Grass Ceiling, which I have a copy of here, by Eimear Ryan, and there's a lot in this book. You could describe it, I think, as a lot of different things: a memoir, maybe a critique. It's funny, it's very moving as well, and I suppose it's a memoir, but someone very young to write a memoir, so it's amazing to have had that much excitement in your life already. So you're very welcome along, Emer. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Millie and Julie. I'm delighted to be here.
I was just saying before we started recording that I found a lot to relate to in the book. I think I had a similar childhood. I grew up in the Midlands, although I think I'm more of a townie than you. And I also studied journalism in DCU, also ran a bit of cross country. So I had lots to relate to in the book. I suppose we might start at the beginning and talk about, I suppose, yourself and how you got to the point where you felt it was time to write a book. As I said, it's very broad reaching. You could look at it in many ways, but how I suppose it came about that you published this at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of came about by accident almost. Back in 2016, I was asked by the editors of Winter Papers, so Kevin Barry and Olivia Smith. They wanted an essay about women in the GAA for their new issue, because they said they'd never really read anything like that. You know, they wanted a kind of a memoir type piece. So I wrote an essay for them called The Fear of Winning, and it was like the most stressful personal thing I've ever written in my life. Because what I didn't realize is, like, when you start talking about the GAA, when you start writing about the GAA, you're suddenly writing about all these other things, like your childhood and your family and your community and your school days, and it all bubbles up. So I was very nervous about that essay being published, but it got a really warm response then, and was kind of widely read. And it was after that, maybe a year later, that my editor at Sandy Cove, Brendan Barrington, approached me and asked, have you ever thought about expanding this into a book? And so that's kind of how it was born. But again, the process was really surprising, because I was going back and writing about a lot about my childhood and my family and so on. But I was being a bit cagey, you know. I was afraid to go really personal. And actually, Brendan was a brilliant help, because he was kind of the one saying, "Oh, that's really interesting. You should go into that more, or you should expand on this bit." Because I think when you grow up in the GAA or in the Midlands or in rural Ireland, everything is so familiar to you, and you forget that this isn't everybody's experience, you know.
Yes.
He was like, nobody's really ever written a book about growing up as a young woman in the GAA in rural Ireland. You know, this is a huge opportunity. And so his enthusiasm kind of helped me, and I kind of realized this is a cool opportunity, you know, to be able to write this experience, which, you know, as you said, and so many people can relate to, you know. I think men and women, but maybe especially women.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny, as I was reading it, I did think that, like, how has this not been written before? Yeah, because as you say, you're right in the thick of it. And maybe since working in the museum, we get visitors from overseas, and sometimes they might ask me to come in and maybe talk to, an American university group, and they just find the whole concept of the GAA amazing. Like, and you're trying to describe to them, the community, the church, the GAA field, the school, that's the local area. So I think this book really puts it across to them. So I'll definitely be recommending it. But it's really eloquently written. So obviously you had a background in you studied journalism, but then I think you kind of, your love has always been more of the creative writing side.
That's right. Yeah, I did 4 years in DCU, and I loved it, actually. I thought it really helped my writing style, actually. Just the way in journalism you're taught to kind of put things as directly and simply as possible, and kind of eliminate any unnecessary details and things like that. It really kind of sharpened my style, I think. But I did figure out early on that I wasn't really cut out for, say, news reporting or anything like that. I was much more drawn to creative writing and fiction writing in particular. So I started writing short stories when I graduated from DCU. I later did a master's in creative writing in Trinity, which was a great year, kind of just a year to focus, I suppose, on your writing. And then in 2021, my first novel came out, Holding Her Breath. So that was kind of a long process, I suppose, of
Wow.
together. But what was funny about the novel was there's a kind of a sporting theme in that as well. The main character is a swimmer, and she's kind of
Right.
she used to be an elite swimmer, and she kind of had a little bit of a mental health moment, we'll say, and had to massively scale back her training. And what I realized almost after the novel was published, I was like, I'm writing about my own experience with sport here, you know.
Just putting it into a swimmer.
Exactly, yeah. So it was really interesting then to actually write my own story in the memoir, and kind of, I suppose, writing it a second time, but just more honestly this time.
Yeah, it's amazing. And going from a short story then to a whole novel, like what is that process like? That sounds terrifying to me.
Yeah, it kind of is. Like I love short stories. That's probably my favorite form to read or to write. And what I love about them is you can kind of hold the whole thing in your head at once, you know, because there might only be 3 or 4 characters, couple of different settings, couple of different scenes. It's all very manageable. Whereas with a novel, it becomes this big sprawling thing, and then there's all this admin involved with kind of keeping track of timelines and of characters, and oh, what color did I say that person's eyes was? And you know, and you end up contradicting yourself because sometimes you just don't remember what you wrote previously. So yeah, you kind of have to keep. It's a much bigger, more sprawling thing. It requires more organization. But at the end of the day, I suppose it is just writing and making stuff up. So they're like
And
that.
I thought it was interesting when you went to study. In the book you mentioned you go to Boston to study, and that's when you really kind of began to appreciate the short story, because Americans love the short story form. But as you say in it, Irish people are famous for it, but we don't necessarily, study it in school. And I hadn't really thought about that, because most of the short stories I've read myself are probably American. So I thought that was interesting, and that you kind of came back and found that love then at that stage.
Yeah, it is interesting because we're known for having this like famous tradition of short stories, you know, was with Frank O'Connor maybe being and Joyce, of course, and, you know, I mean, there's loads of different examples, but yeah, we in school we kind of tend to focus on the poets and the playwrights,
Yes.
and the novelists, and the short story writers don't get as much of a look in, whereas I think in the American education system they're way more focused on the short story as a form in itself, which I think is cool.
That period when you're in America in the book is brilliant. I think it describes like the Boston piece, and then when you go back to New York to work for the year, I thought it was a really lovely description, and I'd say very familiar to many Irish people. I really enjoyed that part. How do you go back and look at periods of your life and make them into a chapter? Like, how do you do that? Do you kind of have loads of things and then you whittle it down, or what way do you approach it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing you kind of have to accept is that my memories of this are very impressionistic, and they're very, I suppose, they're not objective, you know, they're very subjective, and they're very much my own experience, and other people's memories of the same events could be completely different. So
yeah, it's mad.
That's the first thing you kind of have to accept, and you kind of have to make space for that in the writing itself, and kind of say, this is how I remember it, you know, but I could be wrong. And that was fun as well, to kind of allow that ambiguity to come into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose I had diaries from the time. I even had like blogs from some of that time in America.
Yeah.
I had old emails and things that I went back to kind of just try and get a sense of like who I was at that time, and how I expressed myself, and how I kind of went about, you know.
Yeah.
Because I suppose, and I really realized it in the I suppose writing a memoir kind of makes you really reflect on your life, but you do change so much, you know, from a child to a teen to a young adult to now an adult. So yeah, it was about kind of going back and figuring out who that character was almost at that time in my life.
Yeah, you really get a sense, but I thought it was brilliant. Like, it sounded like a great year as well, really fun.
Oh, it was brilliant, and it was the first time in my life that my life wasn't centered around sport,
Yes.
and as positive an influence as sport has been in my life, as much as I love it, and as much as I now kind of choose to participate in it,
Yes.
it really kind of dominated my life, I suppose, as a young person. And so to get a year where I could set it to one side and think about other things that I was into, that was really, really
Yeah.
lovely.
And probably needed, because as you say, it's all consuming, and I hadn't thought about it, but like a lot of young people who, are particularly in GAA, because if you're out of the picture, you're just gone. Someone else maybe takes your place. You do miss out on a lot. You miss out on the J1s, you miss out on the interrail, and I hadn't thought about that, but you do get that sense of freedom in that chapter. And I suppose at the start of the book, and particularly maybe when you're playing on about 10 teams at the same time in your teenage years, you do feel like, oh my God, it's nearly like a treadmill. And you say that about your leaving cert year, that you can even barely put yourself back there now because it was so scheduled.
Oh yeah, like I look back on my leaving cert year and I was like, how did I do that? I couldn't do that now,
Yeah,
but I was just so in it, I suppose, and my life was so regimented, and I just kind of did what was put in front of me. But of course, that can't last forever either. Maybe you could do it for a year, but you couldn't kind of
yeah,
keep going at that pace or that rate. But yeah, it is a funny thing. I think maybe particularly the time that it was like the late 90s, early 2000s. I was in a small rural club. Numbers wouldn't have been huge or anything like that. So
yeah.
you do end up getting pulled into your own age group, plus maybe the next age group up, plus maybe the adult team. And then you've also got a school team and maybe a county team. There's so many teams that you have to kind of show up and train for and play with. And you kind of don't have time to catch your breath in some ways.
Yeah, and I suppose for a lot of us that grew up similarly, that's normal. But when you actually see it written down, it is that this is a bit mad for a young person that's trying to discover other things. You were obviously a huge pop culture piece, which is really interesting as well. And it's very hard to I suppose have a rounded existence when you're fully focused on the team, and a lot of pressure on you as well. I thought it was captured really well, and again, amazing. We haven't really seen it written before, so it's totally unique. Can I go back to the start maybe of the book? I have a few notes here. Sorry, bear with me. Um, I your intro is good in the prologue. Actually, you talk about eating the dairy milk at the match, which I think everybody did. And the A&O there, which I hadn't thought about in ages. I thought that gave me a great laugh. But I think the way you start the book, I suppose, about the hurler's prayer and them playing like a man, that really sets the tone for the book. That was obviously intentional, but while you were writing your memoir, you did want to make a point, I suppose, about the differences maybe between men and women in sport, particularly maybe in Ireland and Gaelic games.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think again, probably the time that I was growing up in sport, like the 90s and 2000s, you kind of just accept a lot of things as truths that then maybe later you
Hmm.
kind of look at from another angle, and as more of a grown up person, and you kind of start to question it a bit more. Because I would have like totally unquestioningly accepted, like, oh, of course the women aren't on telly because they're not as good or whatever, like, or
Yeah,
or like you'd be given out when a female ref showed up to ref your match because you had this ingrained idea that they weren't as good at their job, and uh, I suppose when you grow up in a sexist society, you can't help but internalize these ideas sometimes.
yeah,
It's only when you get older and you kind of stand apart for a second and you kind of, I don't know, maybe you go off and have other experiences and come back to sport and you kind of realize, God, that wasn't true at all, or that was a very
yeah.
biased opinion. So that's another thing that really fascinates me about like my relationship with the GAA. Like I'm always kind of it's an ongoing thing and I'm always kind of renegotiating it and looking at it in new ways. And it's just been such a like rich presence in my life for that reason.
Yeah, I suppose it's nearly like a family member. There's certain
Yeah,
things you don't like about them, but you're involved. You're never going to escape it in many ways. And I suppose you're talking about school, and you had to kind of personally ask permission if you wanted to go to a camogie match, but then the whole school was allowed off to see, the boys playing in a match. whatever it was. And I would think a lot of us, that's, you know, what we did experience growing up, and we do forget about it. So, you know, all of these things do feed into that, which I think comes across in the book, but not in a negative way. You're just kind of saying, look, this is how it is, and now we need to move on from there. And I know the end of the book deals with that a little as well. But before we come to that, I'd like to go back and talk, I suppose, about your childhood. And firstly, did you chat to family members when you were trying to kind of recall all of this, or was it just a stream of consciousness, or did anyone go, that didn't happen, Eimear, what are you talking about, or how did how did that come about?
I didn't really consult anybody, but I did do a lot of research in terms of like going back to childhood diaries, match programs and things like that. Both my parents are brilliant at retaining things kind of like that. So that was really interesting, just going back and looking at those old match programs and realizing I was on the pitch at the same time as someone I made friends with later and things like that, you know. But and my dad actually has a fantastic memory for almost every match I've ever played in. So if I was ever unsure about something, I'd just kind of consult the oracle, you know. But I kind of wrote those first chapters. I wanted them to be very personal and very honest from my perspective. So I kind of just wrote them by myself. But I then did show them to my immediate family, and I was really nervous about it because you know, I suppose you're saying a lot of personal things, and I'd kind of, I suppose, made my peace early on with the fact that I was going to be exposing myself quite a bit. But when you write about yourself, you can't help but pull other people in, whether they're teammates or friends or family members. So I kind of had to, at a certain point last year, when the book was pretty much ready to go, I had to email kind of sections of it to the people who were mentioned in it, just to kind of their sign off, and like if there was anything they weren't happy with, they were free to kind of say, actually, I'd rather you left this out, or I'd rather you change my name to something else, or you know. So that was another nerve-wracking stage, but everybody was very generous and very, very good about it. You know, they mostly just kind of said, yeah, like, this is very honest from your perspective, so, you know, work with.
And I suppose the start of the book, you mentioned your grandfather, and he sounds like an amazing character. So was it nice to go back maybe and have his memory committed to this book? Was that, or was it a sad process for you?
I know it was lovely. Like my granddad Seamus died in 2007, I think, and I was about 20 or 21. So it was really lovely actually to go back and just parse through all those memories and kind of acknowledge as well just what an influence he's had on my life, you know. He was just this like really impressive figure. He had this front room in his house that was just wall-to-wall books, which had a deep impact on me. He had a typewriter that he would work at every day, and like without realizing it at the time, I was kind of learning, okay, being a writer is something you can do, you know, that's a job that you can have, you know. And he was kind of a role model for me in that sense. And then again with the hurling, like I suppose he was the person that you always wanted to impress. If you were going to an under 12 hurling match, you kind of and you saw Grandad in the crowd, you kind of really wanted to perform. And he was just a wonderful, warm, funny, interesting person. And like I say in the book, like I couldn't have started the book any other way. Aside from acknowledging, you know, his massive influence, not just on me, but I think on the whole family, you know.
Yeah, there's a lovely piece in the book when you play at the halftime in Croke Park, and he's sitting up in the Ard Corlia, and you're like dying for him to look down and so that was lovely. And I thought it was interesting too. He was quite academic, and you know, he had Shakespeare in the library, which maybe would have been unusual for a rural GAA person. So his character really did come across in that he sounded like an amazing person. It was sad when the Obama connection came about after for Moneygall. I'm sure he would have got a great kick out of that.
He would have loved it, yeah. And again, you know, he was kind of modeling something to me at the time without me realizing it, which is that you can be really into sports and you can be really nerdy and into books as well, you know.
Yeah, they
because
too can go together.
absolutely, yeah. Because there was definitely times in my life where I felt like I had to choose one or the other, and that there was very little overlap in even in my groups of friends in both worlds.
Yes.
But there's definitely more of us out there than you'd think.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. And hopefully this book will give a kind of more, or, help people and realize you're not alone in these things. Everyone is juggling different personalities, especially when you're young, you're trying to discover who you are. The book always, you talk about the field where you practiced, and you went back later with your nieces and nephews, and place is always, I suppose, anything in Irish literature, in GAA, place is hugely important. And I thought you did evoke the field. We can all imagine it very well. Did you kind of go to places to when you were writing the book to bring you back there, or was it from your memories, or what was your process in terms of, I suppose, creating scenes?
Yeah, a lot of it was from memory, but definitely with the field, I did want to go back because it has changed a huge amount since I was like playing there or training there regularly. Because about how many years ago now? About 6 or 7 years ago, I actually transferred to the Bars Club in Cork City, which I
Yeah.
found in the book as well. So I haven't even trained in the pitch in Moneygall in a long time. So I wanted to kind of go back and see what it's like now. And it is very different in a lot of ways. They've made a lot of different improvements. They've like added a second pitch. Um, you know, the kind of the landscape of it has changed. But at the same time, I think when you spend so much time in one place as a kid, especially, like it always holds very strong memories, And
Yeah.
if I'm out pucking at the high net there, or if I'm pucking against the scoreboard, you're kind of remembering all the times you did that in the past as well, and it's all kind of layered up in this kind of stack of memories. So it was really evocative for me to go back there, even though it is quite different now.
Yeah, yeah, I thought it was lovely, and a lot of us would have, I suppose, similar places, similar GA grounds. I'm just going to go back again to the childhood, because along with GAA, I suppose it's one part of Aurora's childhood, but you talked about, the gymnastics after, the Olympics, that everyone was all about the gymnastics. Then there's Wimbledon, and everyone does that, and a lot of sports memoirs kind of draw on the same things. I thought it was great. Basically, I was talking about, every a childhood memories, and a lot of people have done similar things, recreating Wimbledon, the Olympics. Did you kind of have fun remembering that, or was that a nice place to go back and visit?
Definitely, yeah. Like those childhood summers, like that just seem to go on forever. But I think that was one of my guiding principles when I was writing the book as well. I was like, no matter how specific I think this is to me, or no matter how personal I think it is, it's not. Like loads of people have had the same experience, and
Yeah.
that's really exciting thought, because I was like, even if I'm the more specific that I am about my memories, the more people will identify with it, because they've had that exact same experience. And it was really exciting to think about just communicating with so many people through the book, and the thought that people would recognize their own experience in it. So yeah, anytime I had a bit of doubt, or I was like, is it only me who thinks this, or is it only me who did this? And I was like, no, there's going to be loads of people out there who this will resonate with. So that was kind of
Oh,
something to keep me going.
for sure. And then, but you do get very personal, and you're very honest. Like your secondary school years, were tough, and that must have been hard to go back and revisit. And you're very open and honest about, you were bullied, and you did find it tough. You kind of took a while to find yourself and your tribe, I suppose, within secondary schools. Was that difficult?
It was, yeah. And like, I suppose when you have a difficult experience like that, one of your instincts is to kind of bury the memories and just not go near them, not think about it, just move on, go to college, into the world of work after you're a new person, you can leave all that behind. And that was definitely my kind of coping mechanism for a while. And it was only kind of when I went into therapy and things like that in my early 30s, and very quickly we kind of figured out, oh, this bullying that happened to me when I was a teen really affected me, and really kind of changed the way that I interact with people. It made me very kind of suspicious and wary, and kind of hard with people. I find it very hard to be like open and vulnerable with people, you know. And if someone is being very friendly to me, I'm always slightly on my guard, you know, rather than just welcoming their friendship, you know.
Yes.
So that was very useful to kind of work through that, and kind of to acknowledge even that this thing that happened to me when I was a teen, that happens to so many teenagers, you know. It's such an everyday common experience, but it still does affect you, you know.
Absolutely. And you talk kind of, the picture you paint of, you know, kind of the dressing room, and, you know, going slowly to pull on socks and boots, and, you know, look at your phone, and all of that. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, but it was heartbreaking. And, you know, you're thinking of this young teenager, you're wondering, is there people going through it today? So I thought it was very important that it went into the book, but I can imagine that, you know, it was difficult to write, but it certainly makes the book stronger because, you know, you're 100% honest in it. So I'm sure it was very scary.
Definitely. And even looking back now, and this is kind of, I suppose, something I realized just through the writing of the book, is that like sport became such a refuge for me during those times. But it also kind of became my one source of self-esteem. You know, I kind of put all of my hopes and dreams into sports. And so then when sports didn't work out, I was, you know, floored altogether, because I didn't know where to turn. You know, I didn't have much self-esteem in other areas of my life. So on the one hand,
you're very hard on yourself saying sport didn't work out, like you. And that's for sure. When you're playing for Tip, you're very hard on yourself. But I think you kind of recognize that now in your writing. But at the time, like, you were amazing. You were on the county panel, you know, getting to play some matches, scoring. You were only 20, so you're certainly hard on yourself. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, like you were, but that does come across, and I hope you've kind of, as you've written it, maybe you've come to see, oh, actually, I was pretty good at that.
Yeah, I think what breaks my heart looking back is that, you know, I felt like, you know, washed up at you know, aged 18, 19, 20, and now I'm 36 now, and I'm looking back and I'm like, God, I was only a bab, you know. I was like so young.
Yeah.
But I think it's been just that very, very intense, you know, number of years in my mid to late teens where I was playing so much that I think I just needed a break at that stage. But I wish I would have given myself a chance to go back a bit older, a bit wiser, a bit more mature, and see how I get on, kind of.
Yeah.
But I kind of made a clean break, so.
Yeah, but in many ways, maybe that's what you had to do. And you talk about, I suppose, the image of the sub. You know, you're not going to really start, and it is a kind of a hard cross to bear. And there's a Kilkenny hurler that you referenced that went through a similar thing. And yeah, I hadn't really thought about it. So it is hard because you do have to do all of the training. You show up, you're given the same commitment, and maybe not. You felt a bit like an outsider then when, you know, when you got to the All Ireland and all of that. I hadn't really thought about that. You know, maybe as fans we don't. So maybe, you know, don't be so hard on yourself. And then just moving on, I suppose, before I want to talk a little bit about the end of the book, but before that, I thought when you were transferring, I can imagine that was a huge decision, and you talk about the debates and how it came about, and your partner, I suppose, and he was looking in from the outside going, what is the big deal about this? And you were trying to explain this is a huge deal. I thought the WhatsApp messages that was kind of sad. It was a really kind of low-key end to the career, but lovely and very Irish maybe in some ways. So that was a really nice thing to include the WhatsApps. It was a good way of showing us all how you finished. Had you that in mind all along?
Definitely, yeah. I think a couple of times I thought about narrating, you know, what happened, how I told the girls and how they responded. And I was like, there's actually nothing more powerful than just putting the messages down. Because I thought they were so understanding and kind and generous in their response. And I think I was so nervous kind of telling them in the first place. And I think that comes across as well in my message. But yeah, I obviously had to go to those girls and kind of okay it with them to include the message. Yeah. They were totally fine with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a gas thing, because I think coming from a rural area where most people leave to certainly go to college, maybe to work, we've completely normalized this idea of like coming back a couple of times a week to train or to play a match or whatever, at least every weekend at the very least. But then you talk to somebody who's based in a city and plays for a city club, and they can't imagine that being a normal way of life, because
you mentioned they can go on holidays and someone can slip in, and you're not feeling guilty all the time. It's a hugely different way of looking at things.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then I suppose that travel expenses piece is one of the issues that you kind of address then as we come to the end of the book. I suppose the end is nearly more of a critique of where women's sport is now in Ireland, and particularly camogie and ladies football, but done in, I suppose, a way. It's not, I suppose, because women can be accused of being moany or whatever. I think it's very practical, and the way you've even structured it is really good. Like, it's like there's this, so the men are treated this way and the women who are doing the same thing are treated this way. For example, travel expenses, motherhood is another one, and the one which I've only really started thinking about lately, and is with the clothing, like why you would have white shorts or things like that is absolutely crazy. So I thought it was structured really practically, and when you read it you kind of go, yes, obvious, this is all very obvious stuff, but it hasn't been written down before. So I think it's really timely, and we were mentioning just before we started recording, there's a moment now within the GAA where these are being highlighted by the women players. So, and you say you hope the problems in this book will be nearly irrelevant by next year, that it's all going to be solved. Do you think it will be?
I really hope it will be. I think, like we were saying beforehand, like there seems to be a bit of momentum at the moment. I think the GPA has been massively important just in terms of like solidarity and visibility, and it is so heartening to know that the male players are kind of like, look, they do the exact same as us.
Yes.
Why are our conditions so different? And it shows as well. I think the female players have done a really good job of like educating the male players as well about their circumstances. Like Grace Walsh was talking at a GPA event maybe about a month ago now, and she was talking about when she was in college in Dublin, and she had to like work a couple of shifts at the weekend to like make the money to allow her to travel back to Kilkenny for training. And she had to get a Lewis, she had to get a bus, she had to get there was all these different stages to her journey. And she was talking about seeing her peers, the hurlers who were going to the same college as her, and a car would just pull up on campus for them, and they'd be driven to training and they'd be driven straight back. And just the difference in resources is so huge, and the difference in the players' day-to-day life is so huge, and it's really good that that's just coming into the public consciousness more and more. And hopefully,
you have a brilliant line in the book, which I wrote down. Where is it? Can men identify with women, and can they admire them? So, and that's right, like the way we would admire, I would have admired the Offaly hurlers growing up or whatever it is. It has to be both ways. And you do mention the the swimmers and the tennis players and the athletes, because they're on at the same time, the events. I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it, and I hadn't thought of that. And the same with your own experience in DCU, where you did get some scholarship funding, but then there was rumours you didn't know what was true, like all the men that were playing for county teams or had servants or whatever it was. So it's an interesting, you've lived it yourself, and now you're kind of writing about it. Have any of the current players, maybe the ones maybe involved that have been out in the media, have they been talking to you about the book, or do you know if they've read it?
No, I got a lovely Twitter message from Joan O'Flynn, the former camogie president, and I think she's quoted on maybe page 3 of the
yes.
She has a great quote, which is, "The verb is to hurl." Her point being that even though she's a former camogie association president, she thinks it should be called hurling because it's what we all do. And I think that's a really interesting point. And she sent me a lovely message just to say she'd enjoyed the book, and thanks for the mention. But no, I haven't heard from any current players, but apart from actually my cousin Eimear Ryan, who's an absolute stalwart on the tip team, I've obviously had lots of nice conversations with her. A prominent character in the book itself, so I definitely had to talk to her both before and after publication, but she's just been so supportive and so brilliant about it all. I'm a huge fan of hers. So
Yeah, it's great to have, I suppose, that family thing thread is the whole way through. And outside the family then, have you had, I suppose, how has the book been received? It's not long out, Eimear, so has it been going well?
I think so, yeah. Like I've had some just lovely messages from family members and things like that, and I was a bit nervous about that because I've a really big extended family. My dad is one of 10, and I've loads of cousins on that side, and I obviously wasn't able to kind of show it to everybody before publication. But I knew, writing about my grandfather and things like that, I was like, this is very personal for everyone in my family. But thankfully, they've all been just really lovely about the book, and they all said that they enjoyed it and that they thought it was a nice portrayal, I suppose, of my grandfather as well. So yeah, it's been a really, really warm response.
And for someone, I suppose you've described yourself maybe as a bit of an introvert, have you found kind of the promotion side of it difficult? That must be hard if you're out and observe things rather than maybe be front and center.
100%. I don't mind certain things, like I don't mind one-on-one interviews like this, or I don't mind doing events, or I don't mind talking to print journalists, but for some reason doing radio puts the fear of God in me. I don't know why. Something about the medium, something about the idea that my voice is being broadcast live across the nation really frightens
me. Once
you've
said something, you can't take it back, I suppose, exactly. As well. Yeah.
But no, I've had some, it's such a privilege to be able to put out a book like this and then go and talk about it to people, so I always try and remind myself of that. But yeah, it's been really interesting. Yeah. And I've had some
sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, like, I've had like really lovely conversations about the book, so yeah, it's all been good.
I'm sure it's a great conversation starter of a book. I have a couple of people I'm definitely going to send it to. What's your plan now for next, I suppose? Are you back to creative fiction? Or is that the plan?
That's it, yeah. I've gone back to creative writing, I'm writing a novel, so back to fiction.
Wow.
I've just started a PhD in creative writing in UL, and one of my supervisors is Donal Ryan, the great writer, and he's also a massive Tip Hurling fan. So
it's like a perfect connection.
So we probably spend more time talking about hurling than we do the book or the project, but yeah, no, it's been really good so far.
Oh wow, that's amazing. And I forgot to ask, and I meant it, the photo is amazing, and that's actually when it came into the office when we were selling it in the shop, everyone commented on it. Did you have a few options, or was it always going to be that photo, or how did it come about?
I did. Again, my editor Brendan just kind of asked, do you have any pictures of yourself playing? And I had a couple, but like in a lot of them, of course, I have my helmet on, and yes. I tend to pull really strange faces when I'm playing as well. So like none of them were like that nice. So I sent him like maybe 7 or 8 pictures, mostly from childhood. But he came back straight away saying this is the one. So
that's brilliant. Yeah, it's really eye-catching, very unusual. But thank you so much for chatting. I really enjoyed the book. I think it was a really important one for us to read. I hope loads of people read it, and I wish it continued success, Eimear. It was a really lovely to chat to you this morning. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Julianne. It's lovely chatting to you.